There's a critical moment in every person's life when they realize they can no longer live as a fragmented version of themselves, when the cost of pretending, of appeasing, of shrinking to fit someone else's story finally becomes unbearable. And it's in that moment when you begin to pull yourself together, when you stop apologizing for your existence and start speaking with clarity and conviction, that everything around you shifts. Especially the people who were counting on your silence. You see, narcissistic individuals, or more broadly, those whose identity depends on controlling the world around them, cannot stand someone who finds their center. When you become integrated, when you start acting as if your existence has weight, value, and direction, they notice. And it's not admiration that surfaces first, it's threat. Because your presence reminds them of everything they've tried to suppress: accountability, truth, independence. But here's the paradox: they also recognize your value more clearly than ever. Not because you gave them more, but because you stopped giving yourself away. And the moment you become irreplaceable isn't when you sacrifice everything for others, it's when you reclaim yourself. When you stop being a tool and start being a force. This talk isn't about vengeance. It's not about dominance. It's about becoming whole. It's about understanding that being needed is not the same as being respected, and that real power comes from aligning your words with your soul and refusing to abandon yourself, no matter who it unsettles. Reclaiming your identity begins with setting boundaries that protect your integrity, not your comfort. Too often, people confuse comfort with safety, and in doing so, they trade authenticity for approval. They remain silent when they should speak, agree when they should object, and accommodate when their spirit is resisting. This process is subtle. It happens over years, often without conscious awareness. You learn to read the room, anticipate reactions, avoid conflict, but the cost of that habit is enormous. You begin to fragment. You play roles instead of becoming a person. You lose your edges, and then your sense of self begins to erode. The world around you is full of forces, people, institutions, ideologies that benefit from your compliance. And so, it rewards conformity and punishes resistance. But that resistance is where identity is forged. You don't become yourself by fitting in. You become yourself by discovering where you begin and where others end. Boundaries are not walls, they're definitions. They clarify what you are responsible for and what you are not. Without them, your values blur, your priorities get hijacked, and your energy is drained by things that do not serve your purpose. Setting a boundary, especially for the first time, is not a feel-good act. It's a confrontation. And confrontation brings anxiety. You will feel guilt, doubt, even shame. You will be told you are difficult, selfish, or disloyal. But that discomfort is the growing pain of becoming whole. If your boundaries only protect what's easy and pleasant, they are not protecting anything real. Real boundaries protect your time, your mental space, your emotional clarity. They are not designed to make others comfortable, they are designed to keep you intact. This is especially important when dealing with manipulative people, those who exploit your agreeableness, your need for peace, your tendency to explain yourself. Such people thrive on the absence of your boundaries. They interpret your silence as permission, your accommodation as weakness, and your loyalty as servitude. The moment you draw a line, the dynamic shifts. You change the rules of engagement. You declare not with violence but with resolve that your life is not a resource to be extracted, but a structure to be respected. And that clarity creates resistance, not just from others but from within, because the old version of you, the one trained to prioritize harmony over truth, will try to reassert itself. It will whisper to you that you're being harsh, that you should soften your stance, that peace is more important than principle. But that's the lie that got you stuck in the first place. True peace does not come from avoiding tension, it comes from confronting it directly and choosing to act in alignment with your values, even when it's difficult. Boundaries don't have to be loud or dramatic. They can be quiet, consistent, and firm. A change in response. A refusal to explain. A redirect of attention. But their power lies in the internal shift they represent. You are no longer outsourcing your worth to how others react. You are measuring your decisions by what preserves your integrity, and that shift begins the process of reclaiming who you are. Being irreplaceable is not about being liked, it's about being authentic, disciplined, and rooted in truth. The pursuit of being liked often leads people down a path of compromise. You start filtering your speech, modifying your actions, even altering your beliefs to maintain approval. Slowly, you disconnect from what you actually think and feel because you've learned to prioritize acceptance over honesty. But likability is fragile. It depends on external validation, which is always shifting. What pleases one person today might offend another tomorrow. If you build your identity on being liked, you will always be adapting, performing, adjusting your core self to meet external demands. Authenticity is the opposite of that. It doesn't mean acting without regard for others, it means speaking and living in alignment with your values, regardless of how others respond. And that makes people uncomfortable. When you stop trying to please everyone, you will displease some people. But that friction is necessary because in order to stand for anything, you have to be willing to not fit everywhere. Authentic people aren't easily manipulated because they're not chasing approval. They're anchored in something deeper: truth. And truth isn't always pleasant, but it's the only foundation strong enough to build a life on. Discipline is what keeps that authenticity grounded. Without discipline, authenticity becomes indulgence. Discipline structures your values into habits. It ensures you don't just say what's true, you act in accordance with it, consistently. Being irreplaceable means you do not waver in your principles under pressure. It means you are dependable not in the sense of being agreeable, but in the sense of being rooted, unmoved by social volatility. People learn they can trust you, not because you always say what they want to hear, but because you always say what you mean and mean what you say. And when you're rooted in truth, something powerful happens. You stop competing with others. Because your value no longer comes from comparison, it comes from clarity. You are not trying to be the best version of someone else. You are becoming the clearest version of yourself. That clarity makes you distinct. It gives you a signature and identity that can't be copied or replaced. That is what makes you irreplaceable. Not your ability to conform or outperform, but your ability to bring something into the world that only you can bring, because it's rooted in your unique perspective, forged through discipline and courage. You will be misunderstood. You will be criticized, but the alternative is worse. If you spend your life trying to be liked by everyone, you'll end up being known by no one, including yourself. Irreplaceability is not about being inoffensive, it's about being deeply aligned with your purpose and willing to stand by it, even in the face of discomfort. Because when people encounter someone who isn't swayed by trends, who doesn't flinch at disapproval, who isn't afraid to speak plainly, they take notice. Not always with admiration, sometimes with resentment, but always with respect. Silence in the face of manipulation is complicity. Speaking truth is the first act of liberation. When you allow manipulation to continue without resistance, you aren't just a passive observer, you become part of the system that sustains it. Manipulative people thrive on silence. They rely on your hesitation, your fear of confrontation, your desire to keep the peace. They learn that they can twist facts, distort intentions, play the victim, and rewrite narratives without consequence. And if no one challenges it, that behavior becomes the norm. It becomes embedded in the dynamic. It becomes accepted. You may believe that silence is the safer option. You tell yourself you're being mature, that it's not worth the conflict, that speaking up will only escalate things. And there's some truth in that. It will escalate things. But not because you're wrong, because truth disrupts control. When you name what is happening, when you stop pretending not to notice, you interrupt the power imbalance. That is the first step toward restoring sanity in any relationship, personal, professional, or societal. And it takes enormous courage, because manipulation is rarely obvious. It's subtle, emotional, and often disguised as concern, care, or even love. Speaking truth is not about shouting, it's not about dramatic confrontations or trying to win arguments. It's about clarity, precision, calling things what they are, instead of what someone wants them to appear to be. And that begins internally. You have to stop gaslighting yourself. You have to stop editing your thoughts to make someone else's behavior make sense. You have to stop minimizing the impact of deception and emotional coercion. You know when something feels off. You know when you're being pressured, guilted, or guilt-tripped. The question is whether you'll admit it to yourself and then say it out loud. Truth-telling is a form of personal authority. It signals that you are no longer willing to contort yourself for the comfort of others, that you are willing to risk being disliked in order to be honest. And yes, that will cost you. People who benefit from your silence will not thank you for your truth. They will resist. They will accuse you of overreacting, of being dramatic, of breaking the peace. But what they're really saying is, you've stopped cooperating with the story I was writing. And that's exactly what needs to happen. You cannot heal in a system that requires your silence. You cannot grow in an environment where gaslighting is normalized. You cannot lead, love, or live fully if you are constantly suppressing your reality to preserve someone else's illusion. Speaking truth reclaims your reality. It aligns your inner voice with your outer one. It dismantles manipulation not with force, but with the refusal to lie, the refusal to play along, the refusal to sacrifice your clarity for the comfort of a narrative that never served you. There is always a cost to truth, but there is a greater cost to silence. When you remain silent in the face of manipulation, you teach others that deception works. You teach yourself that your perception can't be trusted, and over time, you start to disappear beneath the weight of someone else's control. You are not morally obligated to remain in roles that diminish you, you are obligated to grow beyond them. Many people stay in relationships, jobs, or communities far beyond what is healthy, not because they are growing or contributing, but because they feel trapped by guilt, by duty, or by fear of judgment. There is a narrative that says loyalty means staying no matter what, that walking away is a failure, that choosing yourself is selfish. But that narrative is a trap. It confuses self-sacrifice with virtue and calls it morality. It keeps people small in the name of goodness. Roles are meant to be temporary vehicles for development, not cages. You may have taken on a role as a caretaker, a mediator, a peacemaker, or a provider. And maybe that role was once necessary. Maybe it helped you survive. Maybe it allowed others to function. But when that role becomes your identity, when it asks you to shrink, to abandon your voice, to carry more than your share indefinitely, it stops being a role and becomes a prison. And staying in that prison, because you're afraid of being perceived as ungrateful or disloyal, is not noble, it's a slow form of erasure. There are people who will only value you as long as you play that role. The moment you begin to change, to speak differently, to ask for more or give less, you'll notice the shift. Support becomes silence. Encouragement becomes resentment. They'll remind you of what you used to be. They'll suggest you've changed for the worse. But growth always threatens those who depend on your stagnation. They don't miss you, they miss the version of you that made their life easier at the expense of your own. And that's not love. That's dependency. Outgrowing a role is not betrayal. It is a recognition that your life is not a static performance. It's a dynamic process, and you are allowed, no, you are required to evolve if you want to live with integrity. The discomfort you feel when you start to step out of a limiting role isn't a sign you're doing the wrong thing. It's growing pain. It's your psyche stretching into the next version of yourself. And the voice is telling you to go back, to play small, to be who you were. They're not speaking to your potential. They're speaking to your past. Freedom doesn't come from being everything to everyone. It comes from being something specific to yourself. That requires clarity about who you are becoming and courage to shed what no longer fits. It means facing the grief that comes when you let go of roles that gave you purpose, even if they came at a cost. It means standing firm when others question your change, when they try to guilt you back into the version of yourself that served their comfort more than your growth. And it means being willing to walk alone for a time while you learn how to carry your own name instead of a title someone else assigned you.